All right, so we've gathered the Ascension team together tonight to talk about team dynamics from A to Z, where we're going to cover planning, communications, proper rehearsal, and sound check procedures, and service execution. I'm Mark, the COO with Ascension. Chad, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hey, I'm Chad. I've been with Ascension since about 2010. Started playing bass in the network. And then in 2012, I moved overseas to Australia and got to go to Hillsong College, where I got to do stuff with bass, but also got to do a lot of stuff with production, learning digital mixers, that kind of thing. So in 2015, I came back to America, got back with Ascension, and that's basically what I've been doing is helping churches to make the most out of their digital equipment. And one of the things that we do at Ascension is we have a YouTube channel called Ascension Worship Tech Tuesday. Basically, I take the things that I've experienced at churches that are kind of common issues and try to distill those down into YouTube videos so that people beyond our area can learn from them as well. And it's been really cool. So that's what I do at Ascension now.
Great. Nice. Caitlin, how about yourself?
I'm Caitlin, and I've been the office manager of Ascension Worship since 2020. I do all the scheduling and admin work for our network churches. I've also been doing a lot of scheduling for many other churches for the last 9-10 years. I also play keys and I MD, and I've been doing that for quite a few years, and I just love serving the local church.
Great. Jamie.
Awesome, yeah. My wife and I, we started Ascension in 2004, and our goal was to be a resource to the local church. Through the years, I have worked at different churches, being a worship director. Currently play electric guitar and MD for the Ascension Collective and several churches in town. And just love to see the church thrive and all it can be.
Great. All right, so Caitlin, kick this off. Talk to us about some elements of planning a worship experience.
Yeah, so a big part of planning your worship service, or just all your services in general, is having a tool to do that. And I recommend using Planning Center because it's just such a great centralized location for all your pastors, volunteers, anyone who needs to see the service, to go and see everything, know what to expect, see the entire schedule of the service. And another important part of planning your service is planning far out ahead, not just 1 to 2 weeks, but at least a month. I'd even say more if you can. But a huge part of that is because we want to instill confidence in our volunteers. So if you can start, if you can just set aside like an hour on a Monday, a couple weeks before the next month, just to schedule out all your volunteers for that month. And then after you finish that, schedule out all the worship songs for your services. And with that, don't just schedule the song, but also add all of the resources that they need. Chord charts, tutorials, if you can find them, or if you can make them yourself even. Also MP3s. And I stress specifically MP3s because you can have the ability in Planning Center to transpose them. And that is huge, like for musicians and vocalists all around. It's really hard to practice as a musician in a certain key when the MP3 is not in that key. So if you can transpose the song, it makes practicing 10 times easier for everyone involved. If you don't have that, if you can't get the MP3 for some reason, Spotify is a good option. You can just create a playlist of all the songs, and they can just click the link and go and listen to the songs. And then if you can't do that, YouTube, there's always YouTube. We don't recommend YouTube, but at least, it's an option if you need it.
Better than nothing.
Better than nothing. Yeah, you at least want to have, you want to have something, and you want to have the exact arrangement of the song. Nothing's worse than, a musician coming on a Sunday and it might be the same song, but a different arrangement. So they practice one version, but you actually wanted another version. That is
a complete difference.
That can be really frustrating on a Sunday for that musician because, like I said, we want to instill confidence. Another part of Planning Center that's great is the confirm and decline options for our volunteers. So if they can't make a service, they can just decline it and you can see it. It'll go to your email. But if you don't schedule far enough ahead, then you might get really stressed. So if you schedule out a week in advance and someone declines, you might only have 3 days to find someone else or find a different option. But if you have an entire month, that is just going to help you. I mean, there have been times I've had to schedule so many services during a week. And if I did not schedule ahead, I would have been stressed out of my mind because people decline, they have lives, they have their own families, their own jobs. So they need that time to prepare to be able to decline without feeling like they can't decline because it's only 3 days before the service.
Right.
So that's such a great tool, and just, encouraging your musicians to decline or confirm if they're available or not.
Now, how do you handle if you have to make a change? Since you're planning that far in advance, pastor throws something at you and you need to make a change. How does PCO or other tools like that help you in that?
Yeah, so Planning Center, you can change it super easily on there. If you don't know what Planning Center is, just look up a tutorial. There's tons of them. And once you learn it, it's a game changer. You'll love it. But once you make that change, there's an option in there where you can email all your volunteers so that they can see that there's been a change. I like to take it a step further and text my entire team because I want to make sure that they know. So I text them, hey guys, just want to give you a heads up. Here's this change on Sunday. Give me a thumbs up if you've seen this. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Because you just want to make sure that they come on Sunday feeling confident, knowing exactly what's expected of them.
Great. So in addition to planning the individual experience, Jamie, tell me a little bit about the importance of planning your team beyond just today. How do you raise up your team?
So, a lot of our churches, maybe your main stage requires a certain level of musicianship. So just for this purposes, let's just kind of rate the musicians A, B, C, and D, A being a pro-level musician. And if your church main stage is an A and B musicianship, well, what do you do with musicians that are C and Ds? Or when you're doing auditions and you have that onboard process, but yet that musician isn't a B or above, I mean, what do we do with our volunteers? Do we just say, hey, good luck next time? So a couple of things that we have seen that really helps build that culture is if that musician is not at a level for your main stage, what do we set in place a plan for that musician to get better instead of just saying, hey man, try again next time and hopefully you'll get better. Well, within Planning Center, you could create a plan that's far enough in advance to where it doesn't go anywhere. It always stays there. And what I'd recommend is put your 5 to 10 top songs that your church plays with all those resources that Caitlin was describing. That way, that musician for the next 3, 6, 9 months, 12 months has something to practice that you play on a regular basis. They're on Sunday, they're hearing it, they're practicing it, and then in a couple months, re-audition, see how much better they've gotten. The other thing that really, I think, helps build that culture is some churches have like a Celebrate Recovery. A lot of times that's on like a Monday night at a church. And sometimes those require a band. So that's a good outlet if your stage is a certain level. Maybe there's some surrounding stages at your church that could give these guys an opportunity to play. A lot of times the difference from that D, C to even B level is just time and experience. So giving an outlet other than your main stage with these resources, I think will increase that musician to get better at a faster pace. The other thing is sometimes we've seen when we've done some trainings, Chad and I, where that electric guitar player is extremely talented and you've got maybe that CD musician that's a guitarist, man, let's put them on that stage and let's be very clear what that purpose is. Let's don't give a false hope to that electric guitar player that's learning. Let's just say, hey, we're going to schedule you a couple times on main stage. For one, we want you to learn from and underneath this skilled musician that's here, and he can actually show you some tips and things that help you get better. Sometimes just getting on that stage and getting used to playing is kind of half the battle. Obviously, musicianship level has to be there at some point, but a lot of times it's just confidence that helps build that.
And even if you can't do that during your service for whatever reason, like let's say you have 2 bass players, obviously you're not going to have 2 bass players for the service, but maybe just during rehearsal, like a couple of the songs, like they can both plug in, or the other person can at least plug in some in-ears just to hear what it's like to be on stage with in-ears. Like those
That's
little
great.
things really help to, like Caitlin was saying, give them all the tools and everything they need to be ready, so that when they do get that opportunity to be like they're the one bass player on stage, it's not all a complete mystery to them. They're ready to go.
That's great.
Great. So, Jamie, tell us a little bit about setting a culture to allow for healthy communication amongst your team.
Yeah. So I think that kind of starts, honestly, with the worship leader. The worship leader should be the most prepared on that stage. And a step further would even be the tech director that's in the back. He needs to be just as prepared as the worship leader is. It's really hard for you to expect your team to come with expectations that you're not following and that you're not giving resources for them to meet your expectations. There's a lot of worship leaders that are just incredible vocalists, so they have no problem communicating to other vocals. But there comes a time when that worship leader has to communicate to a band, and if they're not very, can't communicate that well on the band side, there's a little disconnect that happens. And one way to look past that is create the resources that Caitlin was talking about. Look, if you can't communicate to electric guitar player the parts that he needs to play, that's fine. Just put that tutorial video of the parts you want him to play. And, the goal is when everyone shows up on a Sunday morning, everyone knows their parts. They're not learning their parts. And I know Chad's going to discuss some of that coming up, but the goal is for everybody to come prepared and to honor everybody's timing. The only way that we can effectively honor people's timing is the leader has to be the most prepared.
So what do you do when you've got a team and you need to give some time off to people? How do you address that?
So, that comes back to the leader. It's really hard. I'm sure every worship leader can stand up here and say today, oh, I ask my guys if they need time off. The problem is the musician doesn't want the time off.
Nor does the tech.
Correct. But guess who does? The family needs the time off.
Yes.
So if you're a church that has, one person per instrument, and in the back of your mind that you're like, I would love to give that to my team, but there's just no way. I mean, who's going to play drums if John's not there? Well, an easy way that we have seen through the years to implement that is maybe once every 6 weeks, you set aside an acoustic service. Now, that doesn't mean everyone brings out the acoustic guitars. No, that just means you, the worship leader, leads that congregation in acoustic worship and gives your team some time off. So I think that would be an easy way for you to implement boundaries within your worship team and understand that, hey, look, we care about the family dynamic just as much as the church dynamic.
Right. Great. Chad, tell us about the use of an MD and the communication from front of house to back house.
Yeah. So one super simple, super useful thing that you can do is have a music director mic or MD mic, and then also on the flip side of that, having a talkback mic. So very simple. It's a microphone. If a music director mic would be on stage and someone playing keys or guitar or whatever, they talk in that microphone. It's only going to the band's ears and then maybe some of the tech rooms, that kind of thing. It's not going out into the house. People get confused. It's like, well, he's singing, but it doesn't match up. Well, that's because he's talking to the band through the music director mic. So that's great because it allows you to communicate clearly to people without, having to do a whole bunch of hand signs and that kind of stuff. Way less train wrecks happen when you have that. From the technical perspective, a front of house talkback mic is a really great way for me to communicate with the band on stage. And, there's this physical and in some ways, psychological divide between the people at the tech booth and the people on stage. And this is one way that you can bridge that divide through technology, because it's really easy to talk to people. And just in a practical sense, you can say something like, "Hey, Jamie, I need you to turn your amp down, please," in a calm, collected voice versus, "Hey, can you turn your amp down?" Which is the same concept, but it comes off so aggressive, even if you don't mean it to be aggressive. And maybe, your electric guitarist has had a late night or a long week, and, that comes off aggressive and puts him in a bad mood for the rest of the service, and creates this divide between the two of you, whereas you could simply pick up a $100 microphone and just talk to them very clearly. And then also too, if something happens during the service, obviously you're not going to be yelling that kind of stuff across the room in front of your congregation. You have a clear way to talk to them and communicate, and it just really makes things so much less aggressive and calmer and more collected, and it just works really, really well.
That's
Fantastic.
That's great.
So Chad, expand that out. Going into sound check and rehearsal, what are some key elements to doing that effectively?
Okay, so well, whenever I work with a new team, or even periodically with teams I've worked with in the past, usually one of the first things I'll do is try to circle everybody up and just give them expectations. That's gonna be kind of a big word for what we're talking about in this panel. But telling them, like, hey, when I sound check you, I only want to hear keys when I'm working with keys. I only want to hear guitar when I'm working with guitar. When I ask you to sound check, I'm going to ask you to give me whatever your loudest patch is, and give me, full chords if it's on the keys, full, big strums on electric guitar, whatever it's going to be, so that I can very quickly set the gain setting for everybody right away, because that's the one thing that'll affect everybody. And I want to make sure that that's an effective time to get people's in-ears right, and just really set everybody on the right path for the rest of the rehearsal. So telling people what they're going to do, and then going through, every channel on your soundboard. And a lot of people get frustrated because they're like, oh, well, that's going to take a long time. It'll take a long time the first time you do it. But if you do it every time, eventually you get to the point where you're like, okay, bass, okay, good. I heard, like, just making sure it's working, because that's the time that you can catch if there's like a bad battery or a bad cable, the kinds of things that if everybody just starts playing, which is unfortunately very common in churches, it's very hard to figure out where's that buzz coming from, because it's something like every time the guy hits the floor tom, but that only happens, 5 times in a song, so it's just easier to go through, get all that stuff going. Now everybody's in the right headspace to move on, and then you hand it off to the music director and the worship leader. So that's usually what works for me.
One thing I'd like to add on the sound check side of things, and even on the rehearsal, is especially if you've got different levels of skill on that stage, and I'll just speak to electric guitar players. There's nothing worse than, let's say, that skilled guitar player. Well, maybe on that Sunday morning, the guy that's maybe first couple Sundays on, and he's got a certain lead part that he's going to be playing. My rule of thumb is, in rehearsals, you only play the parts that you're playing on Sunday. There's nothing worse than you playing a part that someone else is playing, because we don't know the confidence level that other musician is at. Sure. And he could be staying up all night because he's nervous about playing that part. And he already is, feels below another person, and you walk into that rehearsal and he's playing it, and then now he has to play it. So I always tell teams, look, in rehearsals and sound checks, just play your part. There's no need doodling or anything like that, because there's nothing worse than trying to run a sound check and you can't hear what's going on because everybody's playing. So those are great tips.
Well, and as a bass player too, on that note, hey, let me hear the bass, and then it's a Victor Wooten bass solo, but you're not going to do that at all during the actual service. So why are you, giving me that now? Because it's going to all change when I actually hear you play. So just play what you're going to play, just super practical.
Chad, go ahead and tell us about one of your pet peeves with call times and how important that is.
Okay. So, and this is common in a lot of churches, but like just being really specific with your terminology and your expectations. So I see a lot of churches will put in their planning center, rehearsal time, but it's very vague. It's like, is that when you show up? Is that when you actually start sound checking? What is it that actually means for you and for your church? And what I would suggest, that you can put a generic call time if you want, but I think you should also specify this is when we're going to sound check. And what that means is that everyone's on stage, everyone has their instruments plugged in and ready to go, and everyone has their in-ears in. Because that way, even if it's, at the end of the list is going to be vocals, I want the vocals to already have their in-ears in, because as soon as the drums start going, they're going to have to deal with that in their in-ear mix. So they should be ready to do it from the very beginning so that everybody has a chance to get the best possible results.
Great. So Jamie, pull this all together. We get done with the rehearsal. We're ready for the executing of the service. What are some tips that you would give us to make that happen effectively?
Yeah, so I think a rule of thumb that we always suggest to churches is usually about an hour and a half ahead of your service time, and that is being punctual with the downbeat or the start of the sound check. But what we recommend is you roll through the songs one time through. After that, we're going to put our instruments down, and we're going to do one of the most important parts of the whole morning is we're going to come together as a team. So front of house, tech guys come down, band comes down, we meet together. Should only take 10 minutes. We're going to run through the PCO run sheet, basically all the transitions that are happening. That's very important because we want the pro presenter person to know exactly what's happening when a video is coming. Sound guy needs to know when MC1, mic 1's coming up to make sure they're unmuted. After that, if you can make this happen, it is a massive culture shift in your worship in your church. I would recommend having your pastor come in during that 10-minute briefing and let him share the wins of Sunday morning. Hey, we're having baptism Sunday today, and this is why I'm speaking on this, and everybody has a part into this service. People's lives will be changed today, and we want to be on the same page of that. And have pastor pray for you. Right after that, band goes up. They run the 5-minute countdown. We usually start at about 30 seconds left. Right when it hits 0, band needs to know how they're getting into the service. And we just do a full dry run is what we recommend with all transitions. Once you're done, everybody understands what happens. And probably the most important thing that you can do, Chad, what is that after dry run's done?
Is reset song 1. So that way all of your faders, all of your transitions on Purpose Center, everything's ready to go for that first song, because you're going to be set for probably song 4 or whatever it is you have at the moment instead.
That's great. So I think just having that, run through tech meeting and then a dry run really sets up a good execution. And one thing that I'd love Chad to talk about is after that service, what is a good practice after the service to do?
So one thing that I find that is incredibly important, and very, very few churches do this effectively or at all. One thing that I picked up when I was at Hillsong College is it's really, really important as soon as the service is over to hop up on stage. You don't have to spend a lot of time doing this, but have a really, really quick team debrief. And that's with the band, the production people. If pastoral staff is able to be there, sometimes they have to be out in the lobby doing stuff, but if they can, it's really, really helpful. And you just focus on a few things like what went well, how do we see God moving in the service? So you're training your people to actually look for that kind of thing. And then without being a negative Nancy, but what could we do better next time? If you're a church that does like 3 services in a row, it's going to get old, but trust me, after every service, you just do it really quick. And then at the very end, again, you can just do it real quick so you can get out of there. If you do one service, I know a lot of churches want the band to be out, mingling with people, that kind of thing. That's completely fine. It shouldn't take more than at most like 5, maybe 10 minutes if something crazy happened that day. But a lot of churches tend to wait until they have staff meeting midweek to do this kind of thing. So one, not everybody's available to be a part of it. Like none of your volunteers are going to be there at staff meeting. And then 2, things, have fallen out of your memory by that point, or you've been holding on to them and now they sound like you've got like a grudge to carry
Right.
out. So just like hitting it right away at the end of the service. Some things that I like to do is to try to make my statements general enough. Like, you have to know your team. Some people would prefer you just to call them out, say, hey, you hit a bad note on that. But usually I would say, like, oh, hey, melodic instruments, I heard somebody was, maybe hitting a funky note in this song, like, and you're not condemning people. And you have to know some people can handle that in a debrief situation where maybe that information is helpful for other people in the team. Some people, if it's not awkward, you might want to talk to them, to the side and just try to get better. Like, create a culture that not only accepts but expects to get feedback on what they can do better. And we've seen teams that are volunteer-based teams become so much better very, very quickly. And I would say one of the main reasons that happened is because they took the time each week just to talk about what they could do better. And then the next week they implemented it. And it's crazy how much faster they worked up that ABCD scale that we're talking about simply by knowing what it is that they need to improve on.
That's great.
That's great information. All right, so if you've got any questions after viewing this, shoot us an email at info@ascensionworship.com. We'd love to work with your team and help you guys get better as well. Thanks for joining.
Also, feel free to check out Tech Tuesday at youtube.com/@AW Tech Tuesday.
He does edit the videos.
I know.